How's that?
Your Honor, I didn't mean for any of this to happen.
Racist judge mocked a black teen in court, then realized he'd just destroyed his own career. The story opens with a chilling portrait of institutional racism, Judge Marcus Rashford in his immaculate black robe, presiding over courtroom 7B like a tyrant over his kingdom, openly mocking 18-year-old Jeremiah Coleman before a single witness has even been called. The judge, a 62-year-old veteran of the bench with 3 decades of unchallenged authority, believes he is facing just another terrified black teenager with an overworked public defender, a case he can dispose of before lunch. But the introduction quickly subverts this assumption by revealing Jeremiah's counsel is not the expected overwhelmed public defender, but rather a composed young attorney whose quiet confidence and meticulous preparation suggest he has come not merely to defend his client, but to systematically expose and destroy the corrupt system Judge Rashford has built over 32 years on the bench. Courtroom 7B had been Judge Marcus Rashford's domain for 32 years, and everything about it bore his fingerprints. The mahogany paneling gleamed under fluorescent lights, polished weekly by maintenance staff who knew better than to miss a spot. Behind the bench hung framed commendations from law enforcement associations, community groups, and political organizations, tributes to a man who prided himself on being tough on crime. The leather chair he occupied sat elevated precisely 18 inches higher than it needed to be, a detail Rashford had personally specified during renovations in 2003. His reputation preceded him into every case. Defense attorneys called him Maximum Marcus in hushed courthouse hallways, a nickname that referenced his sentencing patterns. The statistics told a story the Judicial Review Board had somehow never found compelling enough to investigate. In cases involving similar charges, black defendants in Rashford's courtroom received sentences averaging 42% longer than their white counterparts. Public defenders had filed complaints over the years, 7 formal grievances in the last decade alone, but each had been quietly shuffled into administrative review processes that protected their own. The Bar Association knew. The courthouse clerks whispered about it during lunch breaks. Local civil rights attorneys had compiled the data and presented it at community forums. But Judge Marcus Rashford remained untouchable, insulated by a system that valued seniority over accountability and order over justice. He gazed down now at Jeremiah Coleman with the same expression he'd worn in hundreds of cases before, a mixture of impatience and predetermined judgment. The young man standing before him wasn't a person with a story, with dreams, with a mother in the gallery gripping a worn Bible. To Rashford, he was simply another case number, another statistic to process, another opportunity to send the message he'd been sending for 3 decades. The kingdom was his, and in his kingdom, challenges were rare and consequences were certain. What Judge Rashford didn't know was that his kingdom was already crumbling. The foundation had cracks he couldn't see, and the young attorney now rising to address the court had brought the sledgehammer. Prosecutor Victoria Hayes stood and smoothed her navy blazer, approaching the jury box with the confident stride of someone holding what appeared to be a winning hand. She'd been assigned this case 3 weeks ago and had initially been surprised by its simplicity. Open and shut cases were rare these days, but this one seemed gift-wrapped. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, her voice carrying the practiced warmth of a storyteller. The facts in this case are straightforward. On the evening of March 15, after a community basketball game at the Riverside Center, a police patrol vehicle was vandalized with spray paint. Obscene messages and gang symbols were painted across the hood and doors, causing over $3,000 in damage to city property. She clicked a remote, and photographs of the defaced patrol car appeared on the courtroom's display screen. Several jurors leaned forward, studying the crude spray-painted insults. Hayes let the images linger before continuing. The defendant, Jeremiah Coleman, was apprehended 4 blocks from the scene carrying a backpack that contained 2 spray paint cans, colors that perfectly matched the vandalism you see in these photographs. When officers attempted to question him, he became aggressive and resisted arrest, leading to additional charges of disorderly conduct. Hayes gestured toward her table where Officer Brandon Torres sat in full uniform, his badge polished and reflecting the courtroom lights. Officer Torres will testify that he personally witnessed the defendant spray painting the vehicle before fleeing the scene. Additionally, we will hear from Mr. Richard Chen, owner of Chen's Market located across from where the vandalism occurred. Mr. Chen called 911 to report suspicious activity and identified the defendant as the individual he observed acting suspiciously near the patrol car. She paused, making eye contact with each juror. This isn't a complicated case. We have an eyewitness officer. We have a civilian witness. We have physical evidence, the spray paint cans in the defendant's possession. We have motive, the defendant had been ejected from the basketball game earlier that evening for arguing with a referee. What we have, ladies and gentlemen, is clear-cut vandalism and a young man who made very poor choices. Judge Rashford nodded almost imperceptibly. Victoria Hayes returned to her seat, confident she'd just laid an unshakable foundation. The defense attorney rose slowly, buttoning his suit jacket with deliberate precision. He walked to the evidence table and picked up a single sheet of paper, holding it as though it contained the secrets of the universe. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured, almost conversational. Your Honor, I'd like to direct the court's attention to Exhibit D-7, the 911 dispatch log from the evening in question. He approached the witness stand where Officer Torres had just finished his direct testimony. Officer Torres, you've testified that you witnessed my client spray painting the patrol vehicle at approximately 6:45 p.m., correct? Torres shifted slightly. That's correct. And the prosecution has entered into evidence the 911 call from Mr. Chen reporting suspicious activity. Would you remind the jury what time that call was logged? Torres glanced at his report. 6:47 p.m. The defense attorney nodded, then turned to face the jury. So according to the official dispatch records, Mr. Chen called 911 at 6:47 p.m. to report vandalism in progress. That means the crime was actively occurring at 6:47 p.m. He paused, letting the timeline settle in the jurors' minds. Now, I'd like to introduce Exhibit D-12, security footage from the Riverside Community Center. A bailiff dimmed the courtroom lights slightly as the video began playing on the screen. The timestamp in the corner read 6:45 p.m. The camera showed the community center's main gymnasium, where volunteers were folding chairs and sweeping the floor after the basketball game. Among them, clearly visible in his blue jacket, was Jeremiah Coleman carrying stacked chairs toward a storage room. The footage continued. 6:48 p.m. Jeremiah emerged from the storage room, grabbed a broom, and began sweeping near the water fountain. 6:51 p.m. He was still there, helping an elderly volunteer carry a cooler toward the exit. 6:52 p.m. Jeremiah walked out the main entrance, waving goodbye to the center's director. The defense attorney let the video stop there and turned back to Officer Torres. The patrol car was vandalized 4 blocks away from this community center. The 911 call reporting it came in at 6:47 p.m. This time-stamped security footage shows Jeremiah Coleman inside the gymnasium, helping with cleanup, from 6:45 until 6:52 p.m. He paused, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Unless my client has mastered teleportation, Officer Torres, how exactly did he commit this crime? Mr. Richard Chen sat in the witness box looking considerably less certain than he had during his direct examination. He was a thin man in his late 50s, wearing a pressed white shirt and wire-rimmed glasses that he kept adjusting nervously. The defense attorney approached him with the same measured calm that had characterized his entire performance, carrying a manila folder. Mr. Chen, you testified earlier that you witnessed the defendant vandalizing the patrol car, is that correct? Chen hesitated. I saw someone spray painting it, yes. You saw someone. Could you describe exactly what you saw from your store window? Well, it was getting dark, but I saw a young man in dark clothing with a hoodie spray painting the car. He was black, and he was wearing a dark blue or black hoodie. The defense attorney nodded slowly. From inside your store, across the street, as it was getting dark. How far would you estimate the distance from your store window to where the patrol car was parked? Chen shifted. Maybe 60, 70 feet. 60 to 70 feet, in fading light, through a store window. Did you see the person's face clearly? Well, no, not clearly. The hoodie. So you didn't actually see the face of the person spray painting the vehicle? Chen's voice grew quieter. No, not the face exactly. The defense attorney opened his folder and produced a series of photographs. Mr. Chen, I'm showing you photos from the basketball game that evening. These were posted on the Riverside Community Center's social media page. Can you tell the jury how many young men in this photograph are wearing dark hoodies? Chen studied the images, his certainty visibly crumbling. Several, I suppose. 5, actually. 5 young men, all wearing similar dark hoodies. 3 of them are black. Can you identify which one you saw from 70 feet away through your store window in fading light? I saw the defendant being arrested later, and I assumed. You assumed. The defense attorney's voice remained gentle, but the words landed like hammer blows. So your identification wasn't based on clearly seeing a face. It was based on seeing a general description, young black male in a dark hoodie, and then assuming the person arrested must have been the person you saw. Is that accurate? Chen removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. I thought I was certain, but, yes. I suppose that's what happened. Judge Rashford's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The foundation Victoria Hayes had built was developing serious cracks. Officer Brandon Torres had looked confident during his direct examination, but now, 30 minutes into cross-examination, sweat was forming at his hairline despite the courtroom's aggressive air conditioning. The defense attorney stood at a comfortable distance, holding a stack of documents that seemed to grow more damning with each page he turned. Officer Torres, you've testified that you arrived on scene and personally witnessed Jeremiah Coleman fleeing from the vandalized patrol car with a spray can in his hand. Let's establish the timeline precisely. What time did you arrive? Torres consulted his incident report. Approximately 6:51 p.m. And where were you immediately prior to arriving at the scene of the alleged vandalism? I was responding to a traffic stop on Westfield Avenue. The defense attorney pulled a document from his stack. This is the dispatch log for the evening of March 15th. According to this official record, you were dispatched to a traffic violation at the intersection of Westfield and 9th at 6:38 p.m. Is that correct? Yes. And according to your own radio transmission, logged here at 6:50 p.m., you were still on Westfield Avenue processing that traffic stop. Correct? Torres's voice grew defensive. I cleared that stop and responded immediately to the vandalism call. Westfield and 9th is 6 blocks from where the patrol car was vandalized. The 911 call reporting the vandalism came in at 6:47 p.m. You were still at your traffic stop until 6:50 p.m. Officer Torres, that means you arrived at the scene 9 minutes after the vandalism was reported, not during the act as you've testified. I saw the suspect fleeing. Your incident report states that your partner, Officer James Davis, was the first responder to the vandalism call, arriving at 6:49 p.m. Why isn't Officer Davis here to testify today? Prosecutor Hayes rose. Objection, Your Honor. Officer Davis's presence or absence isn't relevant. The defense attorney turned smoothly. Your Honor, the prosecution's entire case rests on eyewitness testimony placing my client at the scene. Officer Davis was the actual first responder, yet wasn't called to testify. This is directly relevant to whether the identification of my client was reliable or merely convenient. Judge Rashford's face reddened. Counselor, I'm warning you to tread carefully. I'm merely citing established precedent, Your Honor. Brady v. Maryland requires the prosecution to disclose all material evidence. If Officer Davis's testimony would contradict Officer Torres's account, the defense is entitled to know. Rashford glared, but decades of judicial experience told him the attorney was correct. Overruled, he said through clenched teeth. But watch your tone. The defense attorney turned back to Torres. Officer, why wasn't your partner called to testify? Torres said nothing. The silence stretched until it became its own answer. The chambers of Judge Marcus Rashford were as carefully curated as his courtroom, dark wood furniture, legal volumes lining every wall, and framed photographs showing him shaking hands with governors, senators, and police chiefs. The court reporter sat in the corner, her fingers poised over her stenography machine, a silent reminder that every word spoken here would become part of the official record. Rashford stood behind his desk, his judicial robe somehow appearing even more imposing in the confined space. Victoria Hayes sat in one of the leather chairs, her expression carefully neutral. The defense attorney stood, declining the judge's gesture toward the other chair. "Let me be clear about something," Rashford began, his voice carrying the weight of 3 decades of authority. "This case doesn't need to go any further. Counselor, your client is facing serious charges. If this continues and he's convicted, and he will be convicted, I'll have no choice but to impose the maximum sentence. Vandalism of city property, resisting arrest, disorderly conduct. We're talking about 3 years minimum." The defense attorney's expression didn't change. Rashford continued, modulating his voice into something that might pass for reasonableness. "But if we resolve this now, I can work with Ms. Hayes to structure a plea agreement. Probation, community service, maybe 6 months in county at most. Your client walks away with his life intact. He can still go to college, still make something of himself. Isn't that what everyone wants? With respect, Your Honor, my client is innocent." "Innocent?" Rashford's mask of reasonableness slipped slightly. "You've seen the evidence. The spray paint in his backpack, the officer's testimony. The spray paint colors don't actually match the vandalism. The officer who testified wasn't even on scene when the crime occurred. And the security footage proves my client was elsewhere during the commission of the alleged offense." Rashford leaned forward, placing his palms flat on the desk. "Listen to me very carefully, counselor. I've been on this bench longer than you've been alive. I know how these cases end. You're not doing your client any favors by dragging this out." The defense attorney finally allowed himself a small smile. "Your Honor, I appreciate your concern for my client's welfare. However, I should remind you that this conference is being transcribed as required by judicial procedure." He glanced toward the court reporter, who continued typing without looking up. "Everything we're discussing here becomes part of the official record. So when you suggest that my client will definitely be convicted if we continue, and that any conviction will result in maximum sentencing from this bench, that becomes part of the permanent record. As does your implication that justice might be negotiable." The color drained from Victoria Hayes's face. She suddenly understood that she wasn't just witnessing a chambers conference, she was watching a trap being documented in real time. Rashford's voice turned ice cold. "Get out of my chambers. Both of you." Marcus Webb was a broad-shouldered man in his early 50s who carried himself with the easy authority of someone who'd spent decades working with young people. As director of the Riverside Community Center, he'd seen enough to know when something wasn't right, and the arrest of Jeremiah Coleman had troubled him from the beginning. Now, sitting in the witness stand, he was finally able to say what he'd been trying to tell anyone who would listen for 3 weeks. The defense attorney approached him with the same measured calm that had become his signature. "Mr. Webb, you oversee all programs at the Riverside Community Center, correct?" "For the past 12 years, yes. And that includes the community basketball program where the game took place on March 15th? "Yes. We run games every Thursday and Saturday during the season." "Were you present on the evening of March 15th? Webb nodded. "I was there for the entire game and helped supervise cleanup afterward. That's when Jeremiah helped us with the chairs and equipment. Good kid. Always volunteers to stay late." "Mr. Webb, do you know someone named Kevin Price?" Webb's expression darkened slightly. "Yes. Kevin was part of our basketball program until about 3 weeks before this incident." "Can you tell the jury what happened with Kevin Price?" "We had to remove him from the program. Multiple behavioral issues, aggressive play, starting fights, disrespectful to coaches and other players. The final straw was when he threatened another player in the parking lot. We have a zero-tolerance policy for that kind of behavior. The defense attorney pulled a photograph from his folder. Is this Kevin Price? Webb studied it. Yes, that's him. Can you describe what Kevin Price typically wears? Usually dark clothing. Black or navy hoodies, mostly. Similar to what a lot of the kids wear. And Mr. Webb, did something happen in the week before the vandalism that involved Kevin Price and Officer Brandon Torres? Webb leaned forward. Yes. Kevin showed up at the center even though he'd been banned. He was angry, making a scene in the parking lot. Officer Torres, who sometimes patrols our area, responded to the disturbance. There was a heated argument. Kevin was yelling about getting revenge, saying he'd make sure the center and the cops regretted banning him. The defense attorney let that hang in the air. Did you report this to anyone? I filed a police report that same day. I wanted it documented in case Kevin came back and caused trouble. Did anyone from the prosecution's office contact you about this report before today? No. No one ever asked. The defense attorney turned toward the prosecution table. Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence the police report filed by Mr. Webb on March 8, 1 week before the vandalism occurred. He handed copies to the bailiff. Mr. Webb, can you tell me Kevin Price's race? Kevin is white. Judge Rashford's face had gone from red to nearly purple. The defense attorney continued, so to be clear, a young man matching the general description given by Mr. Chen, dark hoodie, similar build, who had been expelled from the basketball program and made threats against both the center and police officers, was never investigated as a suspect in this vandalism. Is that correct? As far as I know, no one ever followed up on Kevin Price. And the only reason you can think of why Kevin Price wasn't investigated while Jeremiah Coleman was immediately arrested? Webb looked directly at the jury. Kevin is white. Jeremiah is black. That's the only difference I can see. The courtroom lights dimmed as the defense attorney approached the screen with a small remote control in his hand. Every eye in the room watched him, the tension thick enough to cut. Even Judge Rashford had gone silent, his earlier bluster replaced by something that looked unsettlingly like dread. Your Honor, the defense subpoenaed all body camera footage from every officer present at the scene on March 15. The prosecution provided us with edited highlights from Officer Torres's camera. However, we also received the complete, unedited footage from Officer James Davis, the actual first responder. I'd like to play that footage now. Victoria Hayes started to rise, then seemed to think better of it and slowly sank back into her chair. The screen flickered to life with the timestamp 6:49 and 3 seconds p.m. The footage showed Officer Davis's perspective as he pulled up to the scene. The patrol car was indeed vandalized, spray paint still wet and gleaming under the streetlights. The camera panned right, catching a figure in dark clothing disappearing around the corner of a building, too far away and too quick to identify clearly, but the build and movement didn't match Jeremiah's. More importantly, the person's exposed forearm visible for just a moment was distinctly pale. The timestamp clicked forward, 6:50 and 17 seconds p.m. The camera showed Officer Davis walking the perimeter, documenting the damage, calling for backup. Then, at 6:51 and 34 seconds p.m., something remarkable appeared in the frame. Judge Marcus Rashford walked into view, approaching the vandalized patrol car. He was in street clothes, khakis and a polo shirt, apparently having been in the neighborhood. Several jurors leaned forward. This was their judge, at the scene of the crime. The audio was clear. Rashford's voice came through Officer Davis's bodycam microphone. What happened here? Davis explained the vandalism, mentioned the 911 call, said they were looking for suspects. And then Rashford said it, clearly and unmistakably, when you find him, and you will find him, make sure this one sticks. We need to send a message to these people. I'm tired of them thinking they can disrespect law enforcement without consequences. The courtroom erupted. Jeremiah's mother gasped. Several jurors' mouths fell open. Even Victoria Hayes looked stricken. But the footage continued. At 6:53 and 12 seconds p.m., officers brought Jeremiah into frame, hands already cuffed behind his back. Officer Torres appeared, pointing at Jeremiah, telling Davis, "This is him." Jeremiah was protesting, trying to explain he'd been at the community center. The timestamp on his arrest, 4 blocks away, 6 minutes after he'd left the community center, walking home. The defense attorney stopped the video. This unedited footage shows 3 critical facts. First, the actual vandal fled the scene and was never pursued. Second, Jeremiah Coleman was stopped simply because he matched a vague description, young, black, wearing dark clothing, 6 minutes after leaving the community center. And third, Judge Marcus Rashford, the judge now presiding over this case, was at the scene before the arrest, instructing officers to make this one stick and referring to these people needing to be sent a message. Judge Rashford shot to his feet. "This is outrageous. That footage was taken out of context." "The footage speaks for itself, Your Honor," the defense attorney said calmly. "And it's now part of the official record." 23 minutes. That's how long the jury deliberated before requesting to return to the courtroom. It was among the shortest deliberations in the courthouse's recent history, and everyone understood what it meant. Jeremiah sat beside his attorney, his mother clutching his hand across the gallery railing, tears already streaming down her face before the verdict was even read. The jury foreman, a middle-aged woman who'd taken careful notes throughout the trial, stood when Judge Rashford asked for the verdict. Her voice was steady and clear. "On the charge of vandalism of city property, we find the defendant not guilty. On the charge of resisting arrest, we find the defendant not guilty. On the charge of disorderly conduct, we find the defendant not guilty." Jeremiah collapsed into his attorney's shoulder, and his mother's sob of relief echoed through the courtroom. But the defense attorney remained standing, his attention fixed on the bench. Judge Rashford was already gathering his papers, preparing to flee to his chambers, when the defense attorney's voice cut through the commotion. "Your Honor, before you leave the bench, there's one final matter." Rashford froze. "What matter?" "The 3 individuals in the back row of the gallery. I believe they'd like to introduce themselves." Every head turned. 3 people in conservative business attire stood in unison. The woman in the center spoke, "Judge Rashford, I'm Catherine Morrison from the State Judicial Conduct Commission. These are my colleagues, David Park and Jennifer Williams. We've been observing these proceedings for the past 2 days." The color drained from Rashford's face. Morrison continued, "Based on what we've observed and documented, including the body camera footage entered into evidence today, the Commission is opening an immediate investigation into your conduct. You're being placed on administrative leave effective immediately, pending the outcome of this investigation. Additionally, we're referring this matter to the State Attorney General's Office for potential criminal prosecution under judicial misconduct and obstruction of justice statutes." Rashford's hands trembled. "You can't, this is a setup. We received notification of potential judicial misconduct 2 days ago," Morrison said evenly. "Everything we've witnessed since then, including your comments in chambers and the evidence of your interference at the crime scene, has been documented. You'll receive formal notification of all charges within 48 hours. At that time, you may choose to resign or face a formal disciplinary hearing." 6 weeks later, Judge Marcus Rashford submitted his resignation in a brief letter that admitted no wrongdoing but cited personal health reasons. The investigation continued regardless, and prosecutors built their case around the body cam footage and transcripts from the Chambers conference. The case would take months to wind through the system. Jeremiah Coleman accepted his full-ride scholarship to State University, where he planned to study criminal justice. The courtroom that had been Rashford's kingdom for 32 years got a new judge, a black woman named Patricia Williams, who removed all the police commendations from the walls and replaced them with a single framed quote, "Justice delayed is justice denied." The system had protected Marcus Rashford for 3 decades, but on one afternoon in courtroom 7B, it finally found a weakness it couldn't ignore: sunlight.